For over 30 years, Earth had been the youngest, member of a group called the Galactic Council, an alliance of 17 advanced civilizations that managed everything, from trade routes between star systems to laws about space travel and planetary rights. At first, joining felt like a dream come true. Humans got access to technology they'd only imagined in science fiction: clean fusion energy, medical scanners that could spot disease before symptoms showed up, even materials that could heal themselves. In return, Earth agreed to follow the Council's rules, accept their oversight, and stay within certain boundaries, especially when it came to expanding beyond the solar system. But over time, what started as guidance began to feel more like control. The Council made decisions about Earth's resources without asking. They set strict limits on how much helium-3, a rare fuel used in deep space engines, humans could mine from the Moon and Mars. They blocked new colonies from forming on potentially habitable moons near Jupiter, saying humanity wasn't ready for independent off-world governance. Earth's diplomats attended every council session, dressed in their best, speaking carefully, trying to sound mature and responsible. Yet their proposals were often dismissed with polite but firm phrases like, "Your species shows promise, but lacks the perspective for this matter," or, "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but interstellar policy requires centuries of experience." Most people on Earth didn't notice the slow erosion of autonomy. Life was better than ever. Disease was nearly gone, poverty had dropped dramatically, and clean energy powered cities from Mumbai to Buenos Aires. But in the colonies, on Mars, the Moon, and the orbital habitats, frustration grew. Workers who spent their lives building domes on red soil or maintaining solar arrays in zero gravity began to ask, why do we need permission to live on worlds we helped terraform? Then came the Mars incident. The Council announced without warning that it was taking direct control of all helium-3 extraction operations on Mars. Their reason? Environmental preservation. They claimed human mining methods were destabilizing the planet's thin crust. Never mind that Earth scientists had spent decades perfecting low-impact drills and recycling every scrap of waste. Never mind that the Martian colonies depended on that fuel to power their life support systems and transport ships. The decision was final. Council enforcers, tall, armored beings from a species called the Varel, landed at the main refinery near Olympus Mons and locked out the human crews. Protests erupted instantly, not just on Mars but across Earth. Students marched in Tokyo, engineers went on strike in Nairobi, and artists projected holograms of Martian sunsets over government buildings in Geneva, demanding answers. The Council's response wasn't anger, it was something worse: condescension. In a public broadcast beamed to every human world, the Council's lead representative, a calm, silver-eyed diplomat from the Kale Confederacy, said, "Patience, young species. Maturity comes with time. You will understand our decisions when you've walked among the stars longer." That phrase, young species, became a rallying cry, not because it was insulting but because it was true. Humans were young, but being young didn't mean being voiceless. It didn't mean accepting orders like a child obeying a parent who never explained why. Back on Earth, governments that had once competed for power now found common ground. For the first time in history, the United Earth Assembly, a body formed after the last global climate crisis, voted unanimously to send a formal protest to the Council. Not a demand, not a threat, just a statement. We built those refineries. Our people live there. We deserve a seat at the table when decisions about our future are made. The Council didn't reply for weeks. When they finally did, it was through a dry legal memo that cited ancient interstellar statutes no human had ever been allowed to read. The message was clear. Earth's opinion didn't change the outcome. That silence hurt more than any sanction. In homes, cafes, and underground labs, people started talking differently. Not about joining the galactic community, but about belonging on their own terms. Scientists who once dreamed of sharing knowledge with alien civilizations began quietly copying data onto shielded drives. Engineers redesigned cargo ships to carry more than just supplies. They added reinforced hulls, hidden comms arrays, and emergency jump protocols. Not because they wanted war, but because they realized something fundamental. Respect isn't given. It's earned and sometimes defended. The shift wasn't loud. There were no declarations of independence, No dramatic speeches from world leaders, but something had changed in the air. Parents told their kids stories not just about Earth's past struggles, wars, pandemics, climate collapse, but about how humanity had always found a way to stand back up. Teachers began including lessons on sovereignty, not just as a political idea, but as a moral one, the right to decide your own fate. And then came the whispers from Titan. Saturn's largest moon had become humanity's next great hope. A cold, methane-rich world where engineers were testing closed-loop ecosystems that could one day support cities. The project was peaceful, scientific, and fully transparent. Or so Earth thought, until council ships appeared in orbit, claiming they were there for a routine compliance inspection. But their actions weren't routine. They cut communications. They grounded all shuttles. And when human technicians refused to hand over control of the life support grid without Earth's approval, the Council enforcers disabled Sector G's oxygen recyclers, citing unverified safety protocols. 12 people died. Not in battle, not in an accident, because someone far away decided their lives were less important than a rule book, written by beings who'd never breathed Earth's air or felt the weight of human loss. The footage leaked 2 days later. Grainy, shaky, but undeniable. A technician's helmet cam showed the moment the lights went out in Sector G, the alarms blaring, voices shouting in panic, then silence. When the video spread, it didn't spark riots. It sparked something quieter, deeper, resolve. People didn't just mourn. They organized. Neighborhoods formed watch groups. Universities opened emergency engineering courses. Retired pilots came out of hiding to train new crews. And for the first time, the phrase humanity stopped meaning just the people on Earth. It meant everyone, everywhere, who carried human DNA and human dreams. The Galactic Council had assumed that humans, like children, would eventually tire of protesting and go back to playing by the rules. They didn't understand that humans weren't children. They were survivors. And survivors don't forget when someone draws a line in the sand and steps over it. By the end of that year, Earth's leaders knew they couldn't keep begging for a seat at the table. If the Council wouldn't make room, humanity would build its own. Not out of anger, but out of dignity. The quiet era of compliance was over. Something new was beginning. Something the Council hadn't counted on. A species that finally believed it belonged among the stars. Not because it was invited, but because it refused to be erased. After the tragedy on Titan, everything changed. Not with explosions or declarations of war, but with a quiet, heavy kind of anger that settled into people's bones. The 12 lives lost weren't just numbers. They were engineers, medics, dreamers who'd left Earth to build something new in the cold dark near Saturn. Their deaths weren't the result of a malfunction or a storm. They were the result of a choice made by beings who saw human lives as expendable, as if rules mattered more than people. News of what happened spread fast. Not through official channels, those were still censored or delayed, but through old-fashioned networks. Encrypted messages passed between freighter pilots, voice logs shared in underground forums, even handwritten notes slipped into supply crates headed for the outer colonies. People didn't need fancy speeches to understand what it meant. They saw the footage, they heard the final transmissions, and they knew. The Galactic Council didn't see them as equals. They saw them as a problem to manage. Back on Earth, cities that had once buzzed with optimism now hummed with tension. In markets, people spoke in lower voices. Parents held their kids a little tighter. But alongside the grief came something else, determination. Community centers turned into planning hubs. Retired engineers came out of retirement to help redesign emergency systems. Students who used to study alien linguistics now focused on signal encryption and stealth navigation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure it never happened again. The United Earth Assembly, usually slow and full of debate, moved faster than anyone expected. Within days, they passed Emergency Resolution 7, a simple but powerful statement. Titan was human territory. The mining operations there were legal, peaceful, and vital to the survival of the outer colonies. The Council's occupation was a violation of basic rights, and they demanded the immediate withdrawal of all non-human forces from Saturn's orbit. The Council's reply came a week later, cold and formal. No apology, no acknowledgement of the deaths, just a list of new sanctions, All human ships were banned from traveling beyond the asteroid belt. Trade in advanced tech, medical scanners, energy cells, even spare parts for water purifiers was frozen. Earth could keep what it had, but nothing new would come in. It was economic strangulation disguised as policy. At first, panic spread. Hospitals worried about running out of diagnostic tools. Colonies on the Moon and Mars feared their life support systems might fail without replacement filters. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of crumbling, humanity started fixing things on their own. Factories that once assembled consumer gadgets switched to making spare parts. Scientists reverse-engineered old council tech they'd been given years ago, not to copy it but to understand it well enough to build something better. On Mars, colonists started growing food in sealed domes using recycled air and water, cutting their dependence on Earth shipments. In orbital shipyards, crews worked double shifts to retrofit old cargo haulers with reinforced hulls and hidden communication relays. They weren't building warships, they were building lifelines, and all of it was done quietly. No grand announcements, no threats. Just people doing what humans have always done when backed into a corner: adapt, survive, and protect their own. But the real shift happened in how people saw themselves. Before Titan, many still thought of the Galactic Council as wise elders, strict maybe, but ultimately fair. After Titan, that illusion shattered. People began asking hard questions. Why do they get to decide what's safe for us? Who gave them the right to shut off our oxygen? The answers were uncomfortable. No one gave them that right. They just took it. In schools, teachers stopped calling the Council guardians of peace and started calling them what they were: a governing body with its own interests. Kids learned not just about stars and planets, but about sovereignty, consent, and the cost of silence. Artists painted murals of the Titan 12, not as victims but as symbols of what happens when you trust too much and question too little. Meanwhile, out near Saturn, the standoff continued. Council ships still hovered over Titan's methane lakes, their sleek hulls glinting in the dim sunlight. Human workers stayed away, but drones, built in secret workshops on Ganymede, began mapping the surface, collecting data, keeping watch. It wasn't confrontation, it was presence. A silent message: we're not leaving. Then came the night everything almost exploded: a human supply freighter, carrying medical kits and seed banks for a research outpost on Enceladus, drifted too close to the Titan exclusion zone. It wasn't intentional. The ship's navigation had glitched during a solar flare. But the Council patrol didn't warn them. They fired a warning shot that tore through the freighter's engine array. The ship spun out of control, losing power, drifting toward Titan's thick atmosphere. For 3 hours, the crew sent distress calls. Earth's emergency response team scrambled, but the Council blocked all rescue attempts, claiming the area was under quarantine. Back on Earth, millions watched the live feed from the freighter's external cam, the ship tumbling slowly, lights flickering, voices calm but strained as oxygen levels dropped. Then, something unexpected happened. A small fleet of civilian ships, mining tugs, research skiffs, even a retired tourism shuttle, launched from nearby moons without permission. They ignored Council orders, formed a protective ring around the damaged freighter, and used their own thrusters to stabilize it. One pilot even jury-rigged a power link to keep the life support running long enough for a rescue tug from Rhea to arrive. The Council called it reckless interference. But across human space, people called it something else: courage. That night, more than just a ship was saved. Hope was. Because it proved that even without weapons or official backing, ordinary people could stand up and stand together. After that, the mood shifted again. Not toward violence, but toward unity. Earth, Mars, the Belt colonies. They started sharing resources openly, creating a network of mutual aid that bypassed Council-controlled channels. They built their own data relays, their own supply routes, their own rules. It wasn't perfect. There were shortages, mistakes, moments of fear. But there was also pride. For the first time, humanity wasn't waiting for permission to take care of its own. And deep in secure bunkers beneath Geneva and the lunar highlands, leaders began planning something bigger. Not an attack, not a rebellion, but a declaration, not with words but with action. A signal to the galaxy that humanity was no longer a child to be managed, but a people to be respected. The Council still thought they held all the power. They had the fleets, the ancient laws, the alliances, but they underestimated one thing. The moment humans stop asking for fairness and start building it themselves, the balance of power begins to tilt. The Titan incident didn't start a war, but it lit a fuse, one that wouldn't explode in fire but in quiet, unstoppable change. And somewhere out there among the rings of Saturn, a dozen ghosts watched, not with sorrow but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing their sacrifice meant something, because after that day humanity didn't just survive, it began to stand tall.
After the standoff near Saturn, things didn't calm down, they went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that comes before a storm. People stopped posting angry messages online. Protests faded from city squares. Even the news channels seemed to lower their voices. But beneath that silence, something powerful was happening. Humanity was pulling back, not in fear, but in focus. The decision came from the highest levels, but it felt personal to everyone. Earth's leaders, backed by every colony from Luna to the edge of the asteroid belt, activated what they called the Silence Protocol. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a threat. It was a choice. From that day forward, humanity would stop talking to the Galactic Council. No more daily reports on resource use. No more diplomatic updates. No replies to messages, warnings, or demands. All official communication channels, once buzzing with translations, data packets, and polite debates, went dark. Human ships stopped broadcasting their flight paths through council-monitored space. Research stations stopped sharing atmospheric readings or geological surveys. Even cultural exchanges, music, art, historical archives were paused. It was like Earth and all its people took a deep breath and held it. At first, the Council didn't understand. They sent repeated hails. They rerouted envoys. They even tried broadcasting public appeals, calling the silence immature and disruptive to galactic harmony. But no one answered. Not because humans were being stubborn, but because they'd realized something important. Every time they spoke, they were playing by someone else's rules. Now, they were writing their own. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of work. In hidden orbital yards above the moon, engineers worked around the clock. Old cargo ships, once used to haul ice from comets or deliver supplies to Mars, were being quietly upgraded. Not with weapons, but with things that mattered more. Better shielding, encrypted communication relays, and stealth coatings that made them harder to track. These weren't warships. They were lifelines, built to move people and supplies without asking for permission. On Earth, universities turned into innovation hubs. Students and professors teamed up to rebuild systems the Council had once provided: water purifiers, medical scanners, even navigation software. They didn't copy alien tech. They studied it, learned from it, and then made something that worked better for human hands and human needs. In basements and garages, hobbyists built signal boosters that could bounce messages off old satellites, creating a private network that didn't rely on Council infrastructure. And in the colonies, people got creative. On Mars, farmers grew crops under red suns using soil mixed with recycled plastic and metal dust. On Ceres, miners repurposed broken drills into power generators. Every community started asking, what can we do without them? The answer, more often than not, was almost everything. But the real change wasn't in machines. It was in minds. Parents stopped telling their kids that the Council knew best. Instead, they talked about responsibility, about building things that last, about standing up when something's wrong even if you're the only one who sees it. Teachers showed students old Earth history, how people once fought for independence, not with guns, but with ideas, with unity, with the simple act of saying no and meaning it. The Silence Protocol also gave people space to listen to each other. Without the constant noise of Council broadcasts telling them what to think or how to behave, communities started making their own decisions. A mining town on Vesta voted to share its oxygen reserves with a struggling research outpost. A group of pilots in the belt created a mutual aid network to help stranded ships. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, mistakes, moments of doubt, but it was theirs. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, the council grew uneasy. They were used to species that begged for attention, that rushed to explain themselves, that craved approval. Humanity's silence confused them. Was it a protest? A breakdown? A prelude to attack? Their analysts scrambled for answers, but there were none because the message wasn't in data. It was in absence. Then came the day a council envoy showed up at Earth's orbital gate. Not with warships, but with a single diplomatic shuttle. They requested an audience.
4 hours. The shuttle waited in silence.
No one hailed them. No docking instructions were sent. Finally, a simple text appeared on their comm screen short, clear and signed by the entire United Earth Assembly. Asterisk, we are listening. But we are no longer negotiating. Asterisk, that message spread fast not through official channels, but through whispers, through songs, through graffiti on colony walls. It wasn't arrogant. It was honest. And it carried the weight of everything that had happened since the first helium-3 refinery was seized on Mars. Back on Earth. Life went on. Markets stayed open. Kids went to school. But now, when people looked up at the night sky, they didn't see distant overlords. They saw neighbors they hadn't met yet, challenges they could solve. Stars they might one day reach not as guests, but as equals. The silence protocol wasn't about cutting ties forever. It was about proving that humanity didn't need permission to exist, that they could stand on their own, think for themselves, and protect their own without shouting, without begging, without losing their humanity in the process. And in that quiet, something new began to grow. Not anger, not fear, but confidence. The kind that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to give you a seat at the table and realize you've already built your own. Far out in the Kuiper Belt, a lone human freighter drifted past Pluto, its engines humming softly. It carried no weapons, no flags, no demands, just supplies for a small science station studying comets. As it passed through a patch of deep space once monitored by council sensors, its pilot smiled. Because, for the first time in decades, no one was watching. No one was judging. No one was in control but them. And in that freedom, humanity found its voice not in noise, but in action. Not in words, but in the quiet certainty that they belonged among the stars. Not because they were allowed to, but because they had earned it.
Everything changed the day the medical ship went dark. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't carrying weapons or secret tech. The Persephone was a simple vessel, white hull, Red Cross on its side, crewed by doctors, nurses, and engineers whose only mission was to deliver life-saving gene therapy to a colony on Eris, a tiny icy world far beyond Neptune. A strange virus had broken out there, something that attacked the nervous system, spreading fast in the close quarters of the domes. Without treatment, hundreds would die. The shipment was urgent. The route was clear, or so they thought. Halfway through the Kuiper Belt, a council patrol intercepted them, not with a warning, not with questions. They simply ordered the ship to power down and prepare for inspection. The reason? Unverified biological protocols. The crew tried to explain. The cargo was sealed, tested, approved by Earth's own health authority. They even offered to transmit all documentation, but the patrol didn't care. Their orders were clear. No human vessel carried medical material without council certification. And Earth hadn't filed the right forms. The captain refused to shut down, not out of defiance but duty. Every minute delayed meant more lives lost on Eris, so they kept moving, broadcasting their peaceful intent on every open channel. That's when the patrol opened fire, not a warning shot, not a disabling blast, a direct strike on the engine core. The Persephone broke apart in seconds, debris scattered across the void. All 87 souls aboard, doctors who'd left families behind, engineers who'd volunteered for the mission, Even 2 young medics on their first deep space assignment were gone before they could send a final message. When the news reached Earth, it didn't spread like wildfire. It spread like ice, cold, slow, and heavy. People didn't scream. They went quiet. In homes and hospitals and schools, a terrible understanding settled in. The Council didn't just see humans as children, and they saw them as risks, and risks in their eyes could be removed. But this time humanity didn't protest, didn't beg, didn't send another polite letter. Within hours, every human-controlled station, ship, and outpost received the same order, broadcast on a secure frequency only humans could access. Stand ready. Defend without escalation, but do not yield. It wasn't a call to war. It was a promise to themselves. From that moment on, no human vessel would surrender without a fight. Not because they wanted violence, but because they finally understood. Kindness without strength gets you killed. Ships that had been drifting quietly through the belt now moved with purpose. Cargo haulers formed protective convoys. Research stations activated hidden defense grids. Nothing offensive, just shields and jamming fields to buy time if trouble came. On Mars, factories that had been making spare parts switched to producing emergency beacons and reinforced hull panels. Everyone knew the rules had changed, and they were ready. Then the Council made their next move. They demanded Earth hand over its entire deep space fleet for re-education and realignment. The message was clear. Surrender your ability to move freely, or face consequences. This time, the United Earth Assembly didn't meet in secret. They broadcast their reply live, to every human world, every colony, every listening post from Luna to the edge of known space. No fancy words, no diplomatic fluff. Just a single sentence spoken by a representative who'd lost a sibling on the Persephone. You crossed the line when you chose to kill our healers. We will not forget. We will not comply. That message didn't just echo through human space, it rippled outward. For the first time, humanity wasn't speaking as a collection of nations or colonies. They spoke as one people, and their voice carried weight. What followed wasn't chaos. It was calm, coordinated resolve. Families packed emergency kits, not for escape, but for endurance. Communities set up local councils to manage food, power, and communication if supply lines were cut. Pilots trained in evasive maneuvers not to attack, but to protect. Even children learned basic signal encryption, turning old games into drills for real-world survival. And something else happened. Something the Council never expected. Other species started paying attention. Rumors spread through neutral trade hubs that a few non-human civilizations, ones who'd also been treated as junior members for centuries, were watching Earth closely. Some even sent quiet signals of support. A shared frequency here. A blind eye turned to a human ship slipping past a checkpoint there. The Council's image of perfect unity was cracking. Back on Earth, people gathered not in anger but in remembrance. Candlelight vigils floated in orbital stations. Murals of the Persephone appeared on colony walls, not with weapons, but with open hands and medical symbols. The message wasn't, "We will destroy you." It was, "We will not be erased." The real power wasn't in what humanity did next. It was in what they refused to do. They didn't fire back. They didn't blockade Council ships. They simply stood their ground, ship by ship, station by station, person by person. And in that stillness, they became impossible to ignore, because the Council had made a fatal mistake. They thought fear would keep humans in line, but fear only works when people believe they have something to lose. After the Persephone, humanity realized they'd already lost enough. What they had left, dignity, unity, the right to care for their own, wasn't for sale. So they held the line. Not with guns, but with grit. Not with rage, but with remembrance. And in doing so, they sent a message clearer than any weapon ever could. We are not your subjects. We are not your experiment. We are your equals, and we will act like it. Out near Eris, the colony never got its medicine. But they didn't die alone. Within days, 3 civilian ships, loaded with supplies, volunteers, and homemade antivirals brewed in lunar labs, slipped past Council patrols and delivered aid anyway. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fast. But it was human. And that, more than anything, showed the galaxy what humanity was made of. Not steel or fire, but stubborn, unbreakable care for one another. Even in the darkest cold of space, that light refused to go out. The Galactic Council didn't collapse overnight. It didn't explode in fire or surrender with flags. What happened was quieter, deeper, like a crack in old ice that slowly spreads until the whole sheet gives way. And humanity, without firing a single shot, stood at the center of it all. After the Persephone was destroyed, the Council expected panic. They expected begging, maybe even a desperate, messy rebellion they could crush and use as proof that humans were unstable. But instead they got silence, followed by unity. That confused them more than any weapon ever could. Inside the Council's grand chamber, a vast floating dome orbiting a quiet star, debate turned to division. Some members pushed for immediate military action, blockade Earth, seize its colonies, install a compliant leadership. But others hesitated. 3 civilizations, the Xanthari, the Orlan Collective, and the Myran clusters, spoke up. They hadn't said much in centuries, always nodding along to keep the peace. But now they questioned the Council's judgment. If we punish them for protecting their own, one delegate said, what message does that send to every young species watching? That was the real shift. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. It was about fairness, about whether the galaxy would keep running on old rules written by the powerful, or start listening to those who'd been told to wait their turn. While the Council argued, humanity kept working. Not on weapons, but on bridges. They shared their encrypted navigation maps with neutral traders. They opened their medical databases to any species willing to exchange knowledge, no strings attached. On Mars, engineers published open-source designs for water recyclers that worked in low gravity. Anyone could build them. It wasn't diplomacy. It was invitation. And slowly, quietly, others began to respond. Then came the day the Council offered a new treaty. Not out of kindness, but because they were losing control. Their sanctions weren't working. Human ships still moved through the belt, colonies still thrived, and worse, whispers of dissent were spreading among other probationary species. If Earth could stand up, why couldn't they? The new treaty promised restored trade, lifted travel bans, and, most importantly, a permanent seat for Earth at the main Council table. No more probation, no more young species talk, just equality. But this time, humanity didn't jump at the offer. They studied it, debated it, consulted every colony, every station, every community from the lunar far side to the icy outposts near Pluto. And when they finally replied, it wasn't with gratitude. It was with terms of their own. They agreed to rejoin, but only if the Council formally acknowledged the deaths on Titan and the Persephone as violations of interstellar humanitarian law. Only if future inspections required mutual consent. Only if no single species, human or otherwise, could be stripped of sovereignty without a full hearing by all members. To everyone's surprise, the Council agreed. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The balance had shifted, and humanity, once seen as the galaxy's newest child, now sat as a peer. Not because they demanded it, but because they'd earned it through patience, pain, and principle. The war never came. But something better did. Respect. In the months that followed, human diplomats didn't strut or gloat. They listened. They asked questions. They shared Earth's history, not just its triumphs, but its mistakes. The wars, the pollution, the times humanity nearly destroyed itself. That honesty surprised many. It showed they weren't trying to dominate. They just wanted to belong on equal ground. And something unexpected happened. Other young species started reaching out. A reptilian colony from the Proxima system asked for help building solar farms. A methane-breathing culture near Vega requested Earth's open-source education modules. Humanity didn't act like teachers. They acted like neighbors, offering help, accepting help in return, learning together. Back on Earth, life didn't magically become perfect. There were still shortages, disagreements, hard days, but people walked a little taller. Kids looked up at the stars not with fear, but with possibility. Artists painted murals showing human and alien hands joined, not in victory, but in partnership. Schools taught a new kind of history, not just what Earth had survived, but what it had chosen. To protect life, even when it was hard. To stand firm without becoming cruel. To fight for dignity, not dominance. The real victory wasn't in treaties or technology. It was in the quiet understanding that had spread across human space. We don't need permission to be worthy. We just need to act like we are. And out there, among the stars, the galaxy began to change, not because one species won, but because one species refused to lose its humanity, even when pushed to the edge. Years later, when new ships launched from Earth not as supplicants, but as explorers, they carried more than supplies. They carried a message simple and strong. We're here, we belong, and we'll treat you the way we wished we'd been treated. No one knew what the future held, but for the first time, humanity wasn't waiting for someone else to write it. They were building it, one honest choice, one shared meal, one rescued ship at a time, and in the end, that's what made all the difference. Not force, not fear, but the quiet, unshakable belief that even the smallest voice, when it speaks truth and stands tall, can echo across the stars and change everything.